Hello, welcome to today's webinar on Gardening 101, Ready, Set, Grow. My name is Deborah and I'm a volunteer at the Minnesota State Horticultural Society. Today's presenter is Courtney Cheetah. If you are not a member of MSHS, now is a good time to join. Members receive not only our award-winning magazine, but also discounts at nurseries and greenhouses, free tickets to our local home show, which is coming up very, very soon, free webinars, and more. Your membership dollars also allow us to bring great programming like this to all of you. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. You are listening to the webinar in attending the webinar in listen-only mode. So you'll be able to hear our presenter, but that way we can't hear you. It's to prevent background noise. You will receive an email with a link to a copy of the recording of this webinar within 7 business days after we finish here tonight. You will also receive a survey. We would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide us with your feedback. If you have questions or comments for our presenter, you can type those in on the panel on the right side of your screen. We'll be covering questions at the end. If you don't see the panel, look for an orange arrow in the upper right corner of your screen. Click on that arrow, it'll pop out the panel. Below the questions pull down, you'll see another pull down marked handouts where you can see and download tonight's resource sheets. You will also receive a copy of the handouts with your follow-up email. Please join me in welcoming tonight's presenter. Courtney Cheetah is the Community Programs Director for the Minnesota State Horticultural Society. Courtney has over 20 years of experience working in horticulture and food systems education. She spent 16 years at the University of Minnesota coordinating the student programs in sustainable agriculture and managing Cornucopia Student Organic Farm. She also has experience growing a wide variety of edible crops, planning and implementing gardens for schools, farms, and food shelf gardens. Take it away, Courtney.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Okay, we're just gonna jump in here. So tonight we've got Gardening 101, and our agenda is really to talk about some basic gardening terms, talk about some basic gardening planning techniques, talk about when and where to plant, and some tips for gardening greener. So I'm just gonna jump in and feel free to throw those questions in the question box, and we'll get to them as we go too. So first thing to think about is really this idea of garden planning. And I want you to just dream big. I want you to think about a space. I want you to think about how do you want to use that space? How do you want to have that space to feel? And there's all kinds of inspiration all around. So you want to check out books and magazines at your local bookshops, scroll through Pinterest and Instagram and bookmark any outdoor spaces, plants, tips, trends that catch your eye. If you have a gardening neighbor, ask them what they're growing. Just basically dream big, think big, think about what you want to do. And then start to put those ideas on paper. You don't have to be a fancy artist. You just need a paper and a pen. Start by mapping out the sunny and shady spots. Add in your house, your driveway, sidewalks, things like that. Note any really wet or dry areas, and be sure to save spots for the plants that you really love or you've always wanted to try. A garden journal is super helpful, and just sketching ideas down can be really helpful as you go. And then as you are going through your planning, start with the big stuff. Pin down, the patios, the pathways, boulders, fences, things like that. If you've got big trees, make sure you know where they are, and then shrubs and smaller plants. And then you want to start mixing in flowers and veggies. They're smaller and they're a lot easier to kind of weave around larger elements. And then it's also good to think about sort of, what practical considerations do you need to contend with? Is there water flow from, the runoff from your roof, or are there traffic patterns, or light and wind and wildlife and neighbors? Even the mailman, where does the mailman walk? Does it make sense to leave a path for the mailman because they're going to walk through the middle of your front yard regardless of where the sidewalk is? So those are all important things to think about as you're going. And then thinking about putting things in odd numbers, especially plants. So blooms of 3 and 5 and 7 they're gonna pack more of a punch than if they're just a single thing. A bed of zinnias creates a sea of summer color and attracts more bees than a lone plant ever could. That said, try incorporating a few standalone specimen plants, especially like a redbud tree or a showy hydrangea as a focal point. And then you also want to like shift your perspective. Like it's so easy to be outside and think about being outside and you know, having that 360 view, but it's also good to like go inside and look out the windows and see like, okay, what's the view going to be like from here? You know, drop in your favorite plants within those daily sight lines. I have a plum tree that's outside my kitchen window and I love being able to watch it throughout the season. So it blooms and then I get to watch the fruit form, and then as the fruits are starting to ripen, I can watch that whole process happen. It's also important to think about foliage first. So thinking about, you know, the flowers often steal the show, but a supporting cast of lots of leaves and stems are just as important. Choosing a variety of leaf shapes and textures and colors to light up the gardens when the blooms inevitably fade is really important. And I also think it's important to think about veggies. So like kale and chard are both delicious and are really beautiful, like leafy greens in the garden with excellent textures and make a good backdrop for a lot of those flowers. So think about mixing and matching those things in. You also want to time it right. So, you know, spring and early summer plants are going to look great when you're out there shopping, but make sure that you're going to choose things that are also going to bloom in July, August, and September too. Evergreens, colorful stems, bright berries can really spruce up winter gardens. And that's kind of the garden planning 101 to think about. And now we're going to move into some more of the kind of terms and lingo that you should definitely want to know. So I'm going to start with annuals and perennials. So an annual is a plant that completes its whole life cycle in a year or less. They require being replanted every year, and their flowers usually bloom profusely throughout the summertime. Perennials are plants that live 2 or more years outdoors in the ground, so you don't have to like do anything special to overwinter them typically. The foliage is going to die back in the winter, but the plants are going to send up new shoots from that same root system in the spring. If you're going to be saving seeds, a lot of times the annuals, well, both annuals and perennials will produce seeds, but biennials, which are the sort of in between here, they're like a 2-season. The first year they'll plant them, they'll have like a rosette, and then the second year is usually when they produce the flowers and the seeds. So keep that in mind as well. And then you also have bulbs, things like amaryllis and dahlias, tulips, things like that. And those can overwinter and come back every year, or they can also just die back and be annual as well. So, or you might have to like dig them up and overwinter them, especially like a dahlia inside, because they just will not survive outside in our cold winters here. Hopefully that helps kind of clear up those terms. Hardiness zone is super important in Minnesota. You know, in Minnesota, we're really focused on zones 3, 4, and 5. In the Twin Cities, we're in about 4B. Way up north is zone 3A, and way down in the southern kind of central Minnesota, you get into a little bit of 5A here and there. And just understanding how cold it's going to get in the wintertime helps you understand what plants are going to survive here. And so that's an important terminology to know. It's also really, really important to kind of think about the sun. So many plants love to bask in the full sun while others thrive in shadier spots, and some require a bit of both. So it's kind of nice to just go grab a lawn chair and spend some time in the untended garden space, see how much the direct light that an area gets, and when it is not in the sunshine, when it is and when it isn't. The most intense hours of sunlight are usually between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Gardens in direct sunlight during those 4 hours will make a great home for plants that thrive in full sun. And ideally, you want at least about 2/3 of the sunlight available each day in those spots. June 21st is the longest day of the year, and we get 15 hours of sunlight on that day. So ideally, if a sunny spot will have at least 10 hours on the 21st of June. And, you know, full sun, so we're talking 6 to 8 hours. There's tons and tons of, you know, plants that will grow in full sun. Lots of good perennials, things like catmint and coneflowers and liatris, rudbeckia, salvia, sedum, shasta daisies, whew. And then most veggies as well. And then we have our sort of top 5 favorite annuals for sun there, the cleome, cosmos, fanflower, Mexican sunflower, and zinnias are all great. But if you have shade, don't worry about it. So shade is usually considered, you know, maybe 4 to 6 hours of sun. There's actually lots of veggies that'll do well in shady spots, things like arugula and beet greens, broccoli, chard, cucumbers, kale, lettuce, peas, radishes, scallions, spinach, and squash. The best peas I ever grew were in kind of a partially shady spot. They produced from, you know, in the springtime, kind of June-ish all the way into August. And by the time I was like, okay, these guys gotta just be done because they just kept producing. And then they just really liked that light condition. So that's important to think about if you have a spot like that, to put those in. Perennials, things like astilbe, bleeding hearts, hostas, turtle heads. And then annuals for shade, things like begonias, borrelia, coleus, impatiens, and tortina. So the middle plant there is the turtle head, and then the other one is the wishbone flower, the tortina. That's an annual. It's a kind of really fun one. I think it looks like little mouths, like singing up at you. Then I think it's important to think about and know the terms of like amend. So that's improving your soil quality and structure by adding organic matter such as compost. And compost is organic matter that is often made up of decomposed plant material to add to soil and replenish the nutrients. So whether your soil is thick and wet, a wet clay, or dry and sandy, the solution is almost always adding compost. It introduces important nutrients and improves soil structure. It's going to help sandy soil retain water, and it's going to break up clay so that water will flow and the roots can grow. So adding compost is a really good thing to do regardless. It's going to help replenish the nutrients in your soil. Everything just grows a little bit better with compost. So definitely seek out some compost to add to your soil. Thinking about, you know, when is the right time to plant? It really depends on the weather, the soil temperature, the specific plant requirements. Some plants can tolerate cooler temperatures, can be planted earlier in the season. So think things like pansies and ornamental kale and diathis, violas, peas, radishes, sweet alyssum. You don't need to like plant everything in one backbreaking session. Spread it out. So plant some hardy annuals in the early spring, direct. So when the chance of frost has passed, and sprinkle in perennials and herbs and more annuals for color throughout the season. Soak up that warm sunshine and smell the fresh soil. You can plant to your heart's content all season long. This is one of my favorite tools that we created last year. It's up on our resource hub, and it just gives you kind of a planting guide to when you can plant what. So you can see, you know, starting in April, as soon as you can work that soil, there's a bunch of things that can go in the soil. There's a bunch of things, or a few things that can go in the soil, things like carrots and peas, but you can start things inside before then, and then plant them outside when it's warm enough in May into June. Some things are going to be ready to harvest pretty quick by the end of June. Other things will wait till later in the season, and you can plant things multiple times too, which is nice. So this is a great plan for direct sowing, and you can download this from the resource hub at northerngardener.org. Next up is cool season versus warm season crops. So cool season are crops that can be planted early in the spring and withstand cold temperatures. You know, spinach, turnips, chard, carrots, kale, peas. They can really be planted as soon as the soil can work, and they're going to germinate when the soil temperature warms up enough. Warm season crops are really plants that require warmer air and soil temperatures to survive and thrive. So things like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, they're really best already started as transplants in the springtime and planted out kind of mid to late May. I always wait till June 1st to plant my tomatoes. I just think they're so much happier. If you can plant them out on Mother's Day weekend, but they're gonna like sit in that cold soil for 2 weeks and just be sad. Versus if you wait till June 1st, they're just gonna be so much happier. And then I also usually wait till June 1st to direct seed things like cucumbers and melons and squash and beans, because then the soil temperature is gonna be warm enough and they're gonna really thrive. Thinking about where to plant, most plants are going to need plenty of space around them for air to circulate and to avoid crowding roots. So you want to think about thinning things. So if you plant something and it comes up really, really densely, thin it out to, whatever the seed package says, or, to a couple seedlings. You can grow things as a clump and have them take up space. But if you've got 20 carrot seedlings all in a square inch, your carrots are never going to get big enough. So thinking about spacing is really important. Being able to reach and care for those plants is important. Staking things up or growing vertically is a great way to sort of maximize the amount of space that you have that you can grow in. Check out those plant tags for more information on sort of spacing and thinning. And it's also really good to keep track of what you've planted where and what does well in some kind of journal, so that you can learn from mistakes and, repeat successes is also really important. So thinking about how to start a vegetable garden. So, lettuce and radishes can be worked as soon as you can work the soil. Beans and summer squash can be planted in late May. And then you want to transplant those peppers and tomatoes in June. The tomatoes and peppers, they could be started indoors ahead of time. You could actually start any of those ahead of time indoors. The radishes probably don't need to be started ahead. They pop up so fast. They'll pop up in 3 or 4 days and they'll be ready in sometimes 25 days, as quick as that. Beans and squash. Squash doesn't really like to be transplanted. That one I wouldn't necessarily start inside, but the beans you could start inside and transplant too. So thinking about veggies for new gardeners, things that are really easy to start from seed, things like beans. Carrots can take a really, really long time to germinate. So you want to make sure that you're keeping them moist. They can take up to almost 3 weeks to germinate. Cucumbers, peas, radishes, squash, zucchini, they're all really easy. Things that you probably want to start with plants for, things like eggplants and ground cherries. Onions, which could be from sets or seedlings. So sets are little tiny baby onions that have been started the year before, and you can buy them. And it just gives you a jump start on the season if you plant sets. Otherwise, seedlings work too. Peppers, tomatoes, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, tomatillos, those can all be started from plants and should be started with plants in the springtime. Or there are things that you can start from seed or plants. So beets, cabbage, chard, kale, lettuce, kohlrabi, turnips, rutabagas. Sometimes you're surprised by those root crops in there, but they actually do great from transplant. You can transplant a lot of those if you want to start them inside and then transplant them out just to get an earlier crop to harvest. That's a fun trick to utilize. Direct sowing. This means just basically planting the seeds directly in their permanent growing space. So a lot of times you just take a stick or a planting marker and kind of make a little furrow. It doesn't have to be very deep. In fact, oftentimes you want it about a 1/4 inch deep. And then you're putting those seeds in that area, in that little furrow, and then pinching it closed and then watering it good. So this is a spinach planting that I did. And it's pretty thick, and that's okay, because when it comes up, it's gonna kind of all go off to the sides and fill in that space nicely. If you don't want to direct sow and you want to get stuff started a little bit ahead of time, winter sowing is a really great option. So we have a webinar on winter sowing if you want to dive deeper into this. That's in the webinar store. I have a workshop coming up this weekend that's sold out, but we're going to try to do another one kind of mid-March. That's on winter sowing natives. That'll be in St. Paul in person live, and we'll show you all the tricks to do that. But basically you're taking a milk jug, you're cutting the sides of it open so you can get in there and access it. You're going to add soil, you're going to poke some drainage holes before you put the soil in, put your seeds in. kind of close up the sides with tape, take the cap off and put it outside. It's going to get rained on, it's going to get snowed on, it's going to freeze, it's going to thaw, but as the air temperature warms up, it's going to warm up the soil temperature, the soil that's in that container, like a mini greenhouse, and those seeds will start to germinate right on time to be planted outside in the springtime. You want to make sure that you water them once they start to sprout and don't dry out. That's probably the biggest challenge with these, but they just really work great, and will save you a lot of I don't know, it's a little bit foolproof. I think it just can work really well. Things that work best, things like cool season crops, flowers, herbs, natives. Your tomatoes and your peppers and your eggplants don't work well for this. It just doesn't get warm enough quick enough, so you're better off buying those transplants from a garden center or a plant sale. But that's a good option. We also have a ton of resources on our Northern Gardener site. Right now, the resource hub is getting rebooted. But even if you just go on to northerngardener.org and put in the search bar winter sowing, it'll take you to the blog and a bunch of different blog posts on winter sowing. So definitely check that out. Not sure where to start. We have this really awesome little 5x5 garden veggie plan that we really like, where you've got pole beans on a trellis in the back, you've got some tomatoes in front of that, some basil in front of that, some scallions on one side, lettuce on the other side, carrots and radishes together. So one of my favorite tricks is to actually plant carrots and radishes together. So you dig that little furrow, just like I showed you with the spinach, and you drop your radish seeds in and you drop your carrot seeds in right on top, and you pinch them close together. And what will happen is in, a couple days, your radish seeds will all pop up like in this picture. And then as they're growing along, right about the time that it's time to harvest those radishes, your carrots will have finally popped up, and you'll know like where the row of plants are. So if you need to pull weeds around them, you can. And basically you can grow like 2 crops in the same place that you normally just grow 1. Giving pole beans and tomatoes something to grow on is really important. Kind of trellising mesh or cattle panels, they can all help things grow up instead of sprawling out. And then there's a lot of these things are going to be ready pretty quickly. So the radishes, the scallions, the lettuce, they'll be ready pretty early on, which is nice. And you can always replant lettuce, radishes, carrots as they are harvested too. Successions, this is the idea of continuously harvest or growing a crop throughout the season. So basically utilizing the same space for multiple crops, timing the planting of crops so that the continuous harvest of that crop is possible. So in this previous slide here where you had the lettuce, once that lettuce is done growing, you could harvest it and then maybe sprinkle a little compost on top of that soil and then replant it to something else. And these are some of the crops that you could replant. You could replant it with beets or kohlrabi. You could plant it with more lettuce. That's not the greatest idea and just in terms of like crop rotation, but it could be done. Radishes, scallions, spinach, turnips, those all can work well to be planted multiple times throughout the season to give multiple harvests. The other ones that I really like are like dill and cilantro. If you like cilantro, you're often going to have to plant it multiple times throughout the season to have it throughout the whole season. Otherwise, your cilantro, when it's little, it's perfect to harvest. And then as soon as it starts to flower, it's better off just letting it flower, letting all the pollinators come visit it and turn those flowers into coriander. And then you can harvest coriander at the end of the season. But cilantro is one of those that you have to plant multiple times to get harvests throughout the whole year. Thinking about what tools you might need to start, a shovel or a spade, trowel. The shovel and spade is kind of the bigger one there. The trowel is more of a smaller handheld tool. Pruners are nice to have for clipping things. Gardening gloves, rain gauge, hose or a watering can is definitely important. Watering wands are very nice. I actually think the soil thermometer is probably my favorite tool. This one here is my favorite. They're maybe like, I don't know, 12, 15 bucks at most garden centers. And I like it because I can go out and I can put it in the soil, especially in the springtime as everything's melting, and I can watch the soil warm up, and I can check it, you know, every couple days and be like, okay, is it up to 55 degrees yet? And once it is, I can start planting. Yeah. Deadheading is another one of those terms that's nice to know, and it's basically you're cutting the spent flowers off to encourage the plant to bloom again. And I think this is a great picture because it shows like deadheading kind of down where the flower bud is coming off of the main stem, and that's where you want to trim it so that it will produce more growth and bloom again and again throughout the season. Another one of those important terms to think about is mulch. So this could be, you know, a wide variety of things. You could use burlap bags, you could use cardboard with some holes in it, wood chips, pine bark, leaves, straw, grass clippings. Basically, you're just trying to create a layer on top of the soil that is going to minimize the weeds, reduce erosion, and moderate the soil temperature and retain moisture. You know, it's nice to be able to sort of see the plants versus the rows. It helps keep the weeds down. It's just a good thing to utilize. Thinking about, you know, ways to grow greener is to utilize, you know, what's on your property. So instead of hauling leaves away in the fall, you can spread them on the garden beds as mulch. Food scraps, plant debris, lawn clippings, they can all be composted and added back to the soil. Picking perennials. Once established perennials and shrubs and trees, they need a lot less fertilizer and water than annual plants, and they make them just more economically and environmentally sound. Natives. So this is another one of those terms. So this is a plant that's been present in a specific geographic area for hundreds of thousands of years, that's well suited to the climate, that supports the native wildlife and requires fewer resources to thrive. A lot of times, you know, it's just a really good to have lots of natives. It's good for the pollinator species in your area. It's just the benefits that we're finding are just really, really high with natives. So definitely thinking about planting natives. And you can save seeds from your natives. That's what the Min Seed Project does. We teach people how to save seeds from natives plants and then propagate them and grow them to have more native habitat. So some of our favorites, 5 native plants for shady spots, things like wild ginger, Solomon seal, cinnamon fern, the ironwood trees or black chokeberries. For sunny spots, the Coreopsis tickseed species, harebells, Joe Pye weed, black-eyed Susan, and nodding onion. And then we even have some native plants for hummingbirds. So columbine, butterfly weed, turtlehead, Virginia bluebells, and cardinal flower are all good ones. And then pollinators. What do I mean by pollinators? Bees, butterflies, hummingbees, and other wildlife that transfer pollen. You know, it's actually really great to, if you have plants that are native, to actually leave them up over the winter. They are going to provide shelter and food for a lot of these pollinators. They can actually overwinter in those plants and just, you know, provide that habitat. It's not even just while they're flowering, it's for a longer even time than that. And they're super fun to watch, and the fuzzy bumblebees, and so fun to see hummingbirds out there too. This is a simple garden bed that can serve up food and habitat for birds and pollinators all year long. You're gonna wanna fill a dry, sunny spot with flowering native plants and watch the wildlife flock. So, you know, you're providing both nectar sources and pollen, but seeds and fruits. It's gonna create a habitat for bees and egg-laying butterflies and overwintering insects, and it's gonna really just reduce the toxins by eliminating needs for pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, or non-organic fertilizers by planting a native pollinator garden. This design is really nice. It kind of gives you an idea of what plants can go where in a you know 10 by 8 foot sunny spot. And these garden plans are actually all available in the dig-ins that are in the handouts. So if you want to go back and find this plan and the other garden plan, you can do that easily. Planting plants where they want to be, so important. Trying to grow a sun plant in the shade is frustrating, expensive, and ultimately not earth friendly. You want to check plant tags for light and sun soil conditions, and remember the gardening mantra, the right plant, right place. It's also important to think about planting in layers. So mixing and mingling trees and shrubs and ground covers, annuals, vegetables, and perennials in layers. Like us, plants are healthier in communities, and those plant communities provide nesting ground and food for wildlife. So planting things in layers, it makes it more beautiful and functional as well. Watering wisely, this is also really important. So if you have a really water hungry plants, you want to group them together to minimize water use. Rainwater is best for plants, so add a rain barrel or to one or more of your downspouts to harvest that like liquid gold for our gardens. Saving seeds, so important. Do you know that seeds are going to adapt to soil conditions where they are repeatedly grown? It's super easy to save seeds from plants that do well in your garden to grow next year. Things like beans and marigolds and sunflowers have the easiest seeds to save. And then really, let nature control the pests. A garden that welcomes a diversity of insects and birds and wildlife is less likely to be overrun by pests. Make sure to include flowers and herbs, especially those with those tiny little flowers in your garden that are going to host beneficial insects. Dill and cilantro are two of my favorites. They just, this little insect here on the bottom is a hoverfly, and I used to grow hoverflies as good as I could grow a lot of vegetables. Like they just would proliferate in the garden and take care of a lot of pests, so that I did not have to. Other easy to grow herbs, things like basil, chives, cilantro, dill, chervil, summer savory, oregano, parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme, chamomile. Interplanting the flowers and with herbs and veggies are going to bring more pollinators to your garden. On that list of easy to grow herbs, I would say most of those you can start from seed. The rosemary, the oregano, and the thyme are probably the ones that you might want to get plants from. And even the sage and parsley. Parsley is kind of slow to get going. So starting with plants from that side of the list is going to be a good idea. If you have like a really tiny space, don't let the lack of space stop you from planting. Herbs and vegetables and flowers can really flourish in containers on windowsills, on tiny balconies, small stoops, and more. Oftentimes, plant sellers are offering a wide variety of things that are going to grow small. So starting a container garden is really easy. Find a container, make sure it has good drainage holes in the bottom, add some potting soil and plant, and you're on your way. So here we've got things like parsley, radishes, calibrachoa, that's a nice flower, cilantro, lettuce, and chives. And then it's important to think about, gardening for the planet. There are, natives are really important. Legumes are also really important. Legumes are things like beans and peas and clovers, lupins. They actually fix nitrogen and build organic matter in the soil. They are just really, really good for in our garden for the other plants and for us. Grasses and things like little blue stem can oftentimes absorb the rainwater and prevent runoff and erosion. And then all plants are going to pull carbon dioxide out of the air and turn it into oxygen that we need to breathe. So just, super important to grow to grow things. Like growing anything is going to be way better than growing nothing. So get out there and grow stuff. Those legumes, this is my hot tip for you. You can get inoculant, which is a mycorrhiza that is in a powder form that if you mix it's a black powder that comes in a little packet like that. If you take that and you mix that up with some water, so it's the consistency of a runny yogurt, and then dredge your bean and your peas seeds through that right before you plant them, they will have, the roots will form these little nodules, and those little nodules are what helps the plant take up that nitrogen from the air and bring it down into the roots and into the plant. A lot of times when I grow peas and beans, when I grow them, I actually just cut them back in the fall and leave the soils, the roots to biodegrade in place so that I'm adding as much back to the soil as I can. The plants will put it in the compost so that they add that nitrogen there too. But it's just a really great tool to have. A few more gardening tips. Start small. Try growing a patio-sized tomato or cucumbers in a container. Fill a small raised bed with herbs and lettuce. Look for a convenient location drenched in full sun and close to a deck or a path so that you can easily weed, water, and harvest. A lot of times when we're starting a vegetable garden, we like put it at the back edge of the property, and that's not the best place to put it. You want to put it someplace where you're going to walk past it often, so that you can visit it and you don't like let it run wild away from you with weeds, and you can stay on top of it. You want to mix plenty of compost in with the soil to add nitrogen. Most vegetable plants are going to require some nitrogen, so if you add compost, you can check that off right at the beginning. You want to start with plants or seeds from your local garden center and easy to grow vegetables such as cucumbers, beans, lettuces, and tomatoes. It's important to feed your garden, twice a month with a liquid seaweed or fish emulsion fertilizer is helpful. It's kind of stinky, but man, it works magic. Weeding early and often is really important. When you're new to gardening, it's important to know what the tiny sprouts of plants look like when the seeds you direct sow first germinate. So you want to even just use Google to search seedlings of fill in the blank so that you can identify the weeds versus what you planted. These are the two handouts that we have for you tonight. These are the two dig-ins that we've created the last couple of years. And a lot of the content from this presentation are found in these guides. And that's just a really great resource for you to get going. There's also a month-by-month to-do list to get you started and keep you going in there as well. And then the resource hub, like I was saying that right now it's kind of getting rebooted, but as of March 1st, it should be back up online, full of lots of resources. There's a few things on there now, but more and more will be coming back shortly. So come visit that as you get growing. Are there any questions?
Yes, there are. So our first question is there an easy way to test your soil pH?
You can get little kits at the garden center. You can get little probes that do it. Those are probably the two easiest way to do it. You can do a soil test, which isn't a bad idea. Soil test at the U of M, I think they cost like less than $20 to submit a soil sample. And they'll come back and give you recommendations. It's usually like the NPK and the organic matter, and the pH is the basic soil test. And so then they'll give you recommendations on if you need to do anything to amend it. Oftentimes I haven't had that much experience of trying to grow a garden and having the pH be off. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Unless you're trying to grow something that really wants a more acidic soil. Like if you're trying to grow blueberries, then yes, you need to make sure that you're checking to see that you have a more acidic soil and amend it appropriately so that those plants will thrive. But for basic plant, veggies and flowers, I wouldn't worry about pH too much.
Do you turn your soil before planting vegetables?
I like to aerate my soil. So what I oftentimes will do is take a pitchfork and kind of put it in the soil and lift it up, and then do that kind of repeatedly in the area that I'm going to grow. I like to you don't necessarily need to turn over the soil because that's going to like break up your soil structure. What you really want to do is add air. So you want to aerate it and break up the clods and then plant. Rototilling like pulverizes the soil down to, and it can like really destroy, like annihilate all the soil structure and the organic matter in the soil. Like rototilling actually will get rid of the organic matter in your soil. So rototilling all the time is a really bad idea. Once a season is fine, but if you can avoid it, I would.
What do you use for weed control?
For weed control, I use my fingers and pull. There's some
That's
really
what I
great
was
little
thinking.
hand tools out there that you can use to like, weed with. Mulch is a really great, way to deter weeds from popping up. But yeah, that's probably the best options. I have used a lot of like landscaping fabric in some situations when I'm growing a lot of something that's really susceptible to weeds. When I used to grow way too many tomatoes, I had landscaping fabric that I planted them into because that just suppressed all the weeds except for the tiny hole, and then I only had to weed the tiny hole that they were planted through. So that can be a useful tool as well.
How many hours is considered full sun?
6 to 8 hours.
Okay. We have somebody who'd like to grow pulses like lentils and asks if you have any recommendations for that sort of plant.
I think and I'm trying to remember if I grew garbanzo beans more so than lentils. I'm not sure how well lentils will do in Minnesota, but give it a try. It can't hurt. Yeah, why not? I would say full sun for sure.
Okay. Should I worry about getting compost from the city or county with the jumping worms that have started to appear in Minnesota?
I probably would. Definitely take that into consideration. It's the people who are selling compost in Minnesota are super aware of the jumping worm situation, and are doing everything that they can do to make sure that that is not in their products. So it's probably worth it to spend a couple bucks and have stuff that is clean and doesn't have jumping worms in it, for sure. And if you want more information, we have a ton of resources. I believe there's several blog posts on the website about jumping worms, and there'll be more in the resource hub coming as soon as it's back up online.
Great. If anyone has any questions that they've been sitting on or trying to figure out how to word, now is the time to send them in. We'll
Awesome.
just give everybody a minute there to figure out. Aha, I knew there had to be at least one. If I'm doing a container garden or a raised bed, what should I use to fill the bottom?
Oh yeah. Um, I would say like depends on how big of a container or raised bed. I mean, you could put some, pea gravel in the bottom or some rocks if you want to make sure you have really good drainage. But honestly, like I've done things like put in the bottom of, maybe if it's a 12-inch bed, I'll fill the bottom 6 inches with the leaves and the grass clippings and, twigs, break them up so they're not too big. But any kind of organic matter in that bottom is going to be great. It's going to, break down over time and just add those nutrients back to your soil. So those can all be good things to kind of fill if it's a big container. I would at least make sure that the top 6 to 8 inches are good soil and compost.
Okay, we just got a flood of more questions. How many
Cool.
inches of soil should be in a raised bed?
So raised bed, the trick with raised beds is you can have a raised bed that's like 2 or 3 inches taller than your soil, your flat soil. And what's going to happen is because it's raised just even up a little bit higher, it's going to drain faster and it's going to warm up faster in the springtime. And that's sort of the advantage of having a raised bed, is that it dries out quicker and gets warmer. So you can plant into it faster in the springtime. It could be as deep as 2 feet tall. It could be, it really depends. And I don't know that it really matters that much how deep it is. I think you probably want to have at least, I would say minimum 8 inches, but really a foot and a half is even better of soil underneath it from the
As
top down. Yeah.
As someone who does raised beds for their vegetables, I'm going to add that it often depends on the vegetables. Like if you only have like a 4-inch bed, you're not going to get good beets.
No.
They're going to be tiny. For something like that, you want a much deeper bed, but at the same time, with 4 inches, your pole beans or sugar snap peas or something, they'll be fine. They don't care
Yep.
because they're a more surface
Yeah.
plant. Um, and what's looking like our last question for the night is full sun continuous, or can it be 4 hours in the morning and then 4 hours later in the day?
Yeah, it could be 4 hours and yeah, different times of day. It doesn't have to be the full, the hottest part of the day. It doesn't have to be full sun. No.
And is there a guide or resources how to make compost with organic waste?
I would do a search on our website. I'm pretty sure there are different, I'll have to double check on that. But yeah, there's definitely lots of resources out there on how to make compost. My favorite kind of method is the kind of biointensive method of making compost where you are making layers. So you start with you start by like aerating that soil in the bottom that's going to be underneath your compost bin. And then you put some, probably like 4 or 5 inches of twigs and sticks at the bottom of it. And then you do layers of brown and greens. So nitrogen and carbon sources. And you're adding maybe a little bit of compost from another pile or compost, even just like composted cow manure, composted, any kind of compost that you have on hand in those layers as well. And then adding lots of water. Really building a compost pile, you want to almost build like a 4 by 4 by 4 foot compost pile all at once and then let it sit and cook and turn it, every few weeks to really make good compost. You can't really like slowly build those layers over a 3-month span and then expect to have compost. It just doesn't ever get hot enough on the inside to do that. But if you build it all at once like that, you can make really great compost. Chicken manure is another great additive for your compost pile if you've got somebody nearby with chickens. Nothing will heat up that compost bin faster than a bunch of chicken manure. Yeah.
Okay, that looks like that's all of our questions for tonight.
Cool. I'm just going to throw in there that it is a great time to become a member of the Hort Society. Deborah was given some great examples of all the good things. The brand new spring issue of the Northern Gardener magazine, I just saw the first copy of it today and it's gorgeous. And it's a big, thick, they said we were gonna, go with bigger, thicker issues and it delivers, man. It has a little more heft than the previous versions, which is really fun. So the Northern Gardener subscription, it's $34 a year. The society membership, $62 a year. That is a really great deal. You get the magazine, you get discounts on classes and webinars. You get discounts at participating garden centers. There's lots of people who pay for their whole membership and just the discounts that they get at their favorite garden centers. There's something like 65, 70 different discount partners across the state that we have. You get 2 tickets to the Home and Garden Show. That's coming up just in a couple of weeks. We're getting all ready for that. There's also the digital membership if you want to go paperless, get a digital copy of the magazine too. And if you are a garden club member or community gardener or student, we have an affiliated membership option too, where you get most of the benefits of the society membership at a discounted rate. So go check all of that out. And yeah.
Okay,
Any
thank
questions?
you. Nope, that's it. That's
Cool.
everybody. Thank you, Courtney.